Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Michael Nyenhuis, President and CEO of Americares and Concordia Leadership Council member, and our distinguished panel.
Good afternoon. Excellent to be here with you this afternoon to talk about a really important topic in our world in a time in which disasters are occurring in increasingly rapid rate, to talk a little bit about preparedness. And we're going to do that this afternoon, echoing a little bit of what the President just had to say in his final remarks about acting locally, the importance of local action in preparedness. So thank you for being here. I'm Michael Nyenhuis, President and CEO of Americares. We're a global health and disaster response organization that is working around the world. And I'll introduce my esteemed panel in just a moment. But first I have a question for all of you. How many of you know that here in the United States, September, this month, is National Preparedness Month? Raise your hands. There's a few of you, mostly my colleagues that I see over here. It is National Preparedness Month, and it's something that we don't take seriously enough. And so we're going to take it seriously in the next 30 minutes. Beyond that, Americares and Concordia over the past year have been taking the topic seriously and engaging in a variety of conversations around preparedness and specifically how to raise the urgency around preparedness and especially at the local level. We started the conversation back in the spring, pulled together a group of 25 to 30 experts on the topic. We did it again with a little bit larger group in June and sort of completed that conversation yesterday in a larger panel discussion we held downstairs, a roundtable discussion that we held downstairs. And part of that was to come to a conclusion on a statement that we would that we'd like to deliver from this stage, a challenge really to the sectors that are involved in this to do a better job in preparedness. So I want to just read a portion of that challenge first, and then we'll turn to our panelists and have them bring us their expertise in the area. So we challenge public, private, and civil society actors and donors to coordinate closely with one another and engage deeply with local communities to ensure that every high-risk jurisdiction has an effective plan to address the continuity of basic infrastructure and services, to align financial and other incentives with needed preparedness and resilience activities, and to build an evidence base to ensure future innovation in the area of preparedness. So with that as sort of a backdrop, I want to turn to my panelists and ask them for a brief opening statement and maybe a little bit of a reflection on the importance of the roles that you can play in local preparedness. And I'm going to start with Ann Young Lee, who is the CEO of the JP Haitian Relief Organization, which is an NGO that works deeply at the community level in Haiti. Seems like a good place to start following your president.
Great, thank you. It's so great to be here on this panel with such incredible people and be invited. I just want to briefly just tell you about a little bit about our organization. We get the majority of our funding from private sources, which gives us and allows us to move quite fast and with a very high degree of risk tolerance. That enables us on the ground to be able to pivot quite quickly. On the flip side, we don't quite fit well in specific categories of emergency response or development, and it also is very difficult to explain your identity to donors. But we still want to keep this flexibility because it does allow us to really respond to the very changing and complex situations post-disaster. Going back to sort of my thoughts on where we can focus on preparedness, I think that there's really three key areas that we should be and we can be focusing on to support local preparedness action. First of all, quite frankly, we really need to tell better stories and really educate the donors and the general public. If you look, when I was looking at, when I was preparing for this speech, I was looking at the photos around some of the preparedness activities, and it is so boring to see people in meetings and in rooms and talking about preparedness planning. And they're so essential, but it's quite boring, and we really need to bring sexy back to this storyline. Maybe it is because, you know, I work with a bunch of millennials, but really, we really need to think about the space that we're in where everyone has access to media, and everyone is so hungry for real, authentic information and a connection to what it is that we are doing on the ground. I don't think that we take advantage to be able to tell the preparedness story enough, and therefore we don't get enough funding in that space. It has the most impact, but we have the least amount of funding in preparedness. And again, technology where it is right now is phenomenal. What we could be doing with, VR, 360, I mean, we could be telling this story much better than what we are doing. Secondly, locals are already doing so much in preparedness. So rather than really spur activities, it's really about supporting and supplying tools. One example is in Savannah, Georgia, where we're actually working in, as well as in North Carolina, where we've just been responding to and plan to work continually in preparedness. There are groups that have very limited resources as we focus on the low-income, high-risk areas, but are doing the best with preparedness. And with our assessments, what we're finding is that there's incredible structures, right? There's the county, the city, the state, and at the federal level that have such incredible assets and planning and such. But it's not necessarily trickling all the way down to these vulnerable communities. Sometimes it's because just from the overwhelming need, but other times it's actual lack of trust because of race issues and socioeconomic issues. I think that our sector has a huge role to play to bridge those gaps and to try to connect those dots. And lastly, as we're thinking about this, I think it's super important that we remember, I think we all recognize that poverty is a huge driver of vulnerability. And essentially, when we're working with people in communities that are again, very low income, they're constantly assessing their own risks. So are they investing their money in building safer homes and thinking about resilience or preparedness, or they're kind of assessing that to investing in their children's education and sometimes putting food on the table. And so if we're not sensitive to those things and kind of work within those constraints, then we're not really going to be able to make the impact that we need to make in that preparedness in that preparedness space.
Great, thank you. Alex Amparo is the Deputy Assistant Administrator for the National Preparedness Directorate at FEMA. So you're right in the middle of it.
That's right.
Can you give us a few comments as well?
Well, first, I think I love the bringing sexy back to preparedness, so thank you, Concordia. We have no choice to talk about your challenge. We have to embrace this, right? When you look at 2017 and you had 45 million people that were impacted by either the fires in California or Harvey in Texas, Irma in Florida, Maria and Irma in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So we have no choice to embrace preparedness at the local level, right? It's a fallacy to think that a government-focused response would work, right? We have to include all parties of it, both the non-government side, the private sector side, and government as an equal partner of that three-legged stool. And so when I think about, well, I'll tell you what, look around you right now. One in four of you will save a life because of first aid or being able to do CPR. All right, that's a reality, all right? And so are you trained? Are you prepared? And when you look at what makes us strong, then it is what makes an individual strong. And so when I think about preparedness, I think more about how do we make it more part of our everyday life, right? And how are we prepared financially, right? If 40% of Americans have trouble getting $400 for an unexpected emergency, right? We've got to be better at being able to help ourselves, those who can, so that those scarce resources, the scarce resources from folks across the table, can get to the folks that most need it. And so going back again to the challenge, I think it is a changing world that we're living in, an increased number of threats that we have. You know, hazards we saw recently, 40 inches of rain that fell in North Carolina. We saw the same thing that happened after Harvey in Houston, right? And so we're seeing this. Now, what are we doing about it? And I think that's part of the strategy I think important for us to talk about today.
Right, thank you. Pam Bondi is the Attorney General of the state of Florida, certainly at the hot seat of disaster response, recovery, and preparedness.
Sadly, hurricanes.
Sadly. Can you talk a little bit about your state's work, especially on the preparedness side?
Sure, and thank you for what Americare does, and Anna, thank you for what you do, and Johnson & Johnson for what you do. And that's really, in my opinion, what it's all about in a natural disaster, whether it's a fire, a tornado, or hurricane. It's all coming together and working together, the business community and the government. And sadly, actually happily today, Alex and I, the last time we saw each other was at the scene of a hurricane.
That's right.
With rain everywhere and flooding and down in South Florida. So it's good to see you here today.
Yes.
But you have different levels of preparedness, and I think now is really the most critical, and that's what people avoid. And I've lived in Florida, I'm a fourth generation Floridian, and I've avoided it. I mean, we should all have our refrigerators stocked with waters, with generators, with everything you need. I think it's more people with small kids at home who are probably a little more conscious of it. But go out and get all those pre-hurricane supplies now, when they're available, when they're on the shelves, when people aren't trying to gouge you. Do all that early on and stock your homes, prepare your homes. Also, as a chief law enforcement officer and legal officer, this is when the scammers hit. And to all our corporate partners out there, spread the word. I mean, Florida, we have a huge senior population, and you would not believe right now when they hear hurricane preparedness, people are knocking on their doors saying, let me trim your trees, let me clean your gutters, you need stronger windows, you need hurricane-proof windows, which we know how much the real ones cost. And they want money up front, so they're scamming people well in advance of a hurricane. So warning our citizens is important too. A different level of preparedness, of course, is once in Florida when we declare a state of emergency. And I'm very proud in Florida that we do have price gouging laws. Some states don't. Some would argue that it's just capitalism. I'm not too happy with a guy named John Stossel. He wrote an op-ed on capitalism at its finest, and to me that's people at its worst when you try to charge $30 for a case of bottled water and go after your fellow human beings, and that's tough. But we do have price gouging laws, and so we're out there. The second the governor declares a state of emergency, and our governor has done such a great job, Rick Scott in Florida, by spreading the word and telling people, get out of our state, especially, we're a peninsula, and think about South Florida. Think about the Keys. There's one way out. That's it. And so you can't leave by boat. I mean, it's truly frightening. So when he's out there promoting leaving, my job is to make sure people can afford to leave. And when they go to a hotel, they can afford a $40 a night hotel. I went to one. First time I got pneumonia was during a hurricane. I was so mad. It was Matthew. I went out during the hurricane because they were charging, it was ridiculous. It was a $40 a night hotel. Families are driving up, they're listening to us saying, get out of town. And then they go to check in and the guy says, oh no, now the rate's $300. You've got grandmothers, kids, families. They can't afford that. It's ridiculous. So we went out, dealing with that. The airlines, I'll tell you what, I was on the phone with every major airline, and one didn't want to waive pet fees, and I said, well, they are, and I'm about to go on the news in a second, and they say, oh, we'll lower our prices and waive pet fees. But the bottom line is it was like Noah's Ark, people getting off those planes. It was great, because people aren't going to leave their animals, but they lowered. All the airlines were great. All the major airlines, they lowered their fees. They set their fees where, like if you go on Expedia or one of those internet things, that's what was happening. They were charging you a higher rate because they saw more people, the automated system were buying things. So the airlines figured out a way to lock all that down, get people out, waive luggage fees, waive pet fees, our hotels. So in a state of emergency, it's different. It's about everybody working together and trying to stop problems in real time to help people in real time.
Great, thank you. Michael Sneed
That's what attorney generals do.
Yeah.
Michael
Sneed is Executive Vice President, Global Corporate Affairs and Chief Communications Officer at Johnson & Johnson. He's a member of the corporation's Executive Committee and leads the corporation's global marketing, communication design, and philanthropy functions. Businesses, corporations like yours, are pretty good at preparedness, business continuity plans, those sorts of things. Tell us a little bit about Johnson & Johnson's experience.
Absolutely, thanks. Well, first of all, thank you and thank Concordia for having me on the panel. It's great to be with my panelists and looking forward to the discussion. Before I do that, I do want to give a plug, because I know this is an audience that's very active, of the Johnson & Johnson Donate a Photo booth right outside. And it's actually supporting one of Americares initiatives called We Hate Hurricanes. And so if you get your photo, J&J donates $1. So don't all go out and rush, but you can do that. Oh yeah, we can clap for that. So one of the things that we are focused on as Johnson & Johnson is around preparedness, but it really comes from our credo. So our credo is really our document that talks about our values, but importantly our responsibilities as an organization. And what's really special about it is that we are very clear about our priorities as a private sector organization. And when you look at it, you might find it a little unusual, but we put patients and mothers and fathers and nurses and doctors as our first priority. And then secondly, our employees. And then importantly, the communities in which we live and work. And then when we do all of that, we expect our shareholders to get a fair return. So I speak about the focus on communities because that's where we really do see the area around preparedness. We've certainly been involved with a lot of organizations, Americares and others, in not only preparing for disasters, but importantly, making sure that our employees remain safe, that their families remain safe, and that we work with the public sector to ensure resiliency among all of those groups going forward. I have the privilege of, as Michael said, I have the privilege of leading our Global Community Impact Organization, and that is the organization that really focuses on the day-to-day disaster relief and preparedness that we implement across Johnson & Johnson. And it's between that organization and our 140,000 employees in J&J who bring their talents and their skills and their capabilities when disaster strikes. But importantly, and I think this is what we would all agree with, importantly, to think about preparedness beforehand so that you are putting together the right infrastructure, you have the right supply chains in place when things happen so that you can limit the amount of impact and heartache, frankly, for families in affected areas.
Great, thank you. So I want to mix it up a little bit and talk a little bit about what we each need from one another. So a couple of you have mentioned that this is best done in partnership, and Concordia is about driving public-private partnerships, including the civil society sector that we represent. So just to turn it a little bit, thinking about preparedness, Michael, I'm going to ask you what you think you need from the government to do improve preparedness in your sector, and I'm going to ask you, Anne, what do you need from the corporate sector for that? And then for our government folks, what do you need from either one of us to do a better job of preparedness? So Michael, I'll start with you. As you look at your government officials here, to do a better job in preparedness, what do the corporate sector need from them?
So putting me on the hot seat here.
Yes, I am.
For us, when you're in the private sector, for us, it's all about speed and agility. Yeah. And so, we're always ready to go. And so what we need from government officials is the ability to get the red tape out of the way, to reduce the bureaucracy, to be able to actually take advantage of the resources that we have. Because J&J, in this space, we don't lack for resources. I'll give you an example. When the hurricane hit in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands last year, we have 6 facilities down in Puerto Rico. We've got 3,700, 4,000 employees. Within days, we were able to coordinate and initiate 27 chartered airplane flights that brought down 700 tons of supplies. We had 30 ships, ready to go on the ocean that brought another 284 tons of supplies, 3,000 generators. And what was remarkable is that time and time again, we were asking the government to help expedite this. And because we were ready and the government had a harder time catching up with us, quite honestly, because this is, we're ready to help and we're here to help, but we need that real partnership with governments to really make it happen and make it happen as quickly as we possibly can, because we've got families and children and everyone else waiting for the relief that we can bring.
Yeah, very good. Speed, that's what we need. Anne, what about you? As you think about the corporate sector and your partnerships with corporations, how can they best help us in civil society?
I think that's exactly it, the speed and agility. I mean, there's no doubt in every context that we've been in, it's been the private sector, local as well as corporate, international, that have been fundamental to cut through the logistics nightmares that happen. In Haiti, for example, after the earthquake, there were difficulties in getting materials in for months. You could have ordered materials externally and it was stuck in customs for 6 months. It was the local private sector that was able to cut through that, and we never had a problem. We were one of the few organizations that were able to get things out because we relied on the local private sector to be able to use whatever systems that they have to be able to get it done. It's that speed and agility that I think marries very well with us. And I do think, you know, again, for what NGOs, what we're finding is that a lot of times it's so much easier to cut through and look at like corporate relationships where we provide the NGO sector sort of like the last mile in terms of targeting and identifying the particular needy communities while working with the local government there to make sure it gets to the right people. But we need help because we don't do the logistics piece very well. So it's that speed and agility married with the last mile that I think makes the most sense.
Really good. And Alex and then Pam, as you think about partnerships with the not-for-profit sector, with the corporate sector, what do you need from them to improve preparedness on the ground?
Sure. So I need Michael to open the doors and get back to business as soon as possible, right? I think that the important part of it is that, look, a disaster happens on one day, the day before, the private sector provided social service needs, provided feeding, they had commercial stores, they supermarkets. We want those back open again, because it does impact families. And it's about where people work, where they go to worship, where they go to school, right? And you want communities to remain in place and not be displaced because they don't have those lifelines. From the NGO sector, it's to do the things that are not inherently government, right? I can't, as government, wrap my arms around you and sit down here and talk with you as a disaster survivor that's lost everything, but there are organizations that have that expertise. And so what we have to talk about is, understanding the question though, it is, what is our reliance on each other? What is the cascading effects? Because we can move things, but it does nothing if the port can't get back open and things sit on the port. Right? There's not a government entity that is a power company, right? And so if power comes back on, and that's a private sector thing like Florida Power and Light done very quickly, right? These are the things that we have to figure out. If there are regulations, then which ones do we cut? That's what we need to do now. If there is transportation or waiver needs, I think the Attorney General knows about those. Let's get those done right now so that way we can facilitate and allow the private sector that owns 85% of the infrastructure in the United States to get going quicker, and then also the NGOs. So really, the expertise of knowing communities better than anybody else, because they're in communities every day. And so we have to be able to pull on that unique skill set that they bring to the table.
Pam.
And I wholeheartedly agree, and through a horrible hurricane, I mean, Irma, we saw pretty much no red tape, thanks to FEMA, thanks to the president. I mean, we would call, we got the fuel waivers to get the fuel in the state as soon as possible, convoys of lumber trucks coming into our state, and of course we need your products as fast as possible to stop the gougers. So one call and we'll get law enforcement involved. It's like you forget who's corporate and who's government. It's all about helping your fellow human being. And I had written down a note, Next Era Energy, which is Florida Power and Light, TECO, Tampa Electric. You forgot which power, they weren't competing, they were working together. The linesmen, the semi-trucks, everybody just coming into our state with the lumber, with the fuel, with the generators, and with the help that we needed. And the American Red Cross, I mean, just getting the people into our state afterwards was so important.
Very good. So in the business sector, there's a concept called business continuity, and we all know that term, business continuity, keep the business being able to run. I think there's a parallel concept that you might call community continuity. How do you keep the basic services in a community that the local community needs to function, that we all need to be operating? So community continuity, can the basic services be up and running fast so that the community can continue to operate? Small business owners and transportation and all of that working again right away. So just thinking about what could be done, one or two things that could be done to improve community continuity, to the speed with which the local basic services could be back up and running again to help the community fast. In Puerto Rico, obviously, things like power not coming on for weeks and months, and in some places not even for a year, is just not acceptable in terms of a community continuity lens. So just a thought or two about what might be done to improve this idea of community continuity. And whoever wants to jump in first.
Yeah,
Michael.
Michael, I'd say one of the things, and we feel like we do a great job with disasters, but one of the things we learned out of Puerto Rico is that we actually set up an office called the Crisis Management Office, and it worked. It was its own entity to actually work directly with community leaders on a few things. First and foremost, to Alex's point, is making sure that we kept our facilities open, because that is the lifeline for these folks. So you have a disaster, but they still need to go to work, they still need to get a paycheck, et cetera. And so with our crisis management organization, not only did we understand their personal needs in terms of things they needed for their home, et cetera, but we also made sure that we had a priority around making sure that our 6 plants in this case remained open. How do we get them open quickly? How do we get people back to work? Not because it was a benefit to J&J, but we knew it would be a benefit to them and their community. And so that was a real insight for us.
Good.
I would like to add, it's so different in the US and internationally, right? So what I keep seeing, especially in the international disasters, is that we are very siloed. We work in sectors. There's the cluster sectors, and we basically provide specific services. Each organization kind of has their specialty in one thing or the other. But in reality, human beings and community members don't think in terms of like those sectors. They think in terms of an ensemble of services and assistance that improves their quality of life. But our structures aren't quite set up that way to work in that manner. So there's like an absolute disconnect in how we're interfacing with the community. We're saying, okay, for this, you need to go here and talk to this person, go to this cluster meeting, go here. It just doesn't work very well. And I think for community continuity, there needs to be a different approach in terms of, can we come in and have a much more geographic anchor and have a 360 approach, knowing that that's how people live and that's how we think as humans, and provide those services that are much more integrated rather than siloed. And we're very far from there, but I do think that there's ways for us to do that now in terms of working together through partnerships. For example, going into North Carolina, we made sure that, we're a small, very small organization, but we know that we can leverage our flexible resources with that of other partners that can provide the medical piece, that can provide, the food piece, that can provide the materials piece. And we're coordinating that and doing, again, the last mile and doing the muck outs. But together, the communities don't see it as, okay, where do I have to go for what? We're coming in with the local leaders and the local government to say, we're trying to address all of these things to get your neighborhood back up and running again.
Very good. I want to just modify the question for the two of you in our last couple of minutes here, and that is, why do you think people, organizations, governments don't put enough attention on preparedness? Lots of attention, lots of budget goes to response and recovery. Why not preparedness?
So I'll say we should, and when we look at the finances, every dollar that we spend on mitigation or preparedness action is $6 that you save on the back end. And so, I think there's a no-brainer to me. Now, the part of it also is that we've got to change and not just think about preparedness when there's a Category 5 hurricane coming towards you. And that's true in a community. And so, and you also, as a community, you can't operate in one way, as we do every day now, and then post-disaster operate in a different way. There's not a business case around that. And so from my standpoint, I think it's important for us collectively to be able to help communities identify their risk. And if they understand what is their risk, then they have the ability to be able to do something about that with respect to the means that they have. And so in certain communities, it might be buying insurance. In another community, it might be community emergency response team training, or you're the help until help arrives. All of those things, to me, is what I believe is going to be very important, not on the disasters that occur every day, but on those huge disasters that are going to stretch every resource on the stage.
Pam, last word?
Well, and just really listening to us, listening to Governor Scott when he's out there saying, get out of the Keys, get out of Miami. People need to listen, and it's better to be prepared and leave, especially when you have kids, when you have elderly. We're opening shelters because so many people we found don't want to leave their animals. And get out of there and listen to what we're saying and follow through, and then have the resources in place to help you once you leave. We'd rather have 10 false alarms than have one person hurt.
Good. So just as a last word, it is National Preparedness Month. You can do your part by going downstairs to the lobby level, past the registration. You find the Johnson & Johnson photo booth. Get your picture taken. For every picture taken in their donate a photo through this, $1 goes to preparedness activity. So you can do your part today. Please help me thank the panel, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.